Good morning and a very warm welcome to our first and hopefully last Digital Genesis conference. The life sciences industry has been in the spotlight for much of the year as we strive to cope and recover from the unprecedented events of 2020. While most of us have been in some form of lockdown for large parts of the year, governments and the public have been pinning their hopes on the life sciences industry for economic recovery and returning to some semblance of normality, hoping they'll develop drugs to moderate the effects of COVID-19 or an effective vaccine to prevent the infection in the first place. This week has seen the culmination of gargantuan efforts by the sector in the initial vaccination programme being initiated in the UK and elsewhere. To me, this momentous effort has illustrated the rapid way life sciences can react to a particular medical problem and come up trumps, and not Donald Trump, I hasten to add. The flexibility has been shown by life sciences companies and organisations in response to the pandemic has been extraordinary. It's only through the research continuing with unprecedented pace that we've reached the stage we have. Make no mistake, we have a long way to go yet, but the light can be seen at the end of the tunnel. Well, what happens next? Things certainly will not be the same as they were. One of the consequences of COVID-19 for the industry has been the effect on clinical trials. Unless you're a company developing a COVID treatment or vaccine, these companies most likely paused any ongoing trials and certainly mostly unable to initiate new ones. One other thing that's happened to everyone is the acceleration of the use of technology in order to conduct the day-to-day work. Most people prior to March not even heard of, let alone use Zoom as an everyday work platform. Other personal VC platforms are available. Most people did not have multiple Zoom calls in a day. Today is the norm. Similarly, it is clear the use of objective digital analytics and the capabilities of modern technology for drug discovery will be accelerated and will become the norm. For companies that want to differentiate themselves based on the outcomes their innovative products deliver, digitalization will become vital. So too are, as important, the cloud platforms, AI, machine learning, and other digital tools that accelerate costly aspects of drug development and automated human error-prone steps. There's a lot of uncertainty what post-pandemic world will look like, but rest assured, most life sciences organisations have survived thus far. There is still technology being invented and developed, and biotech and pharma companies are inventing and developing new therapies that meet unmet medical needs. Investors are still investing. The industry has just demonstrated how resilient it is, and coupled with the flexibility, it has shown it will ensure a future success. I'd like to just thank and acknowledge the One Nucleus team have endured all of these changes at work and have worked diligently to deliver membership services and digital conferences such as Genesis so successfully. And so to today's programme. We have lots of exciting things lined up for you, and please remember that all events happen via the app. If you're a social media aficionado, please make use of all of these social media channels as the day goes on. Networking has already gone virtual, and the event platform, again, the place to head to for that. Finally, before I introduce the first presenter, remember to head to the app to cast your vote for the finalists in the Bio News Round Award. Voting is open till 1600. That's all I have to say in way of introduction, and it is indeed a great pleasure to announce our first presenter, Mike Ward. Mike is well known in the industry and is, in my opinion, one of the most talented journalists of our generation. His incisive analysis is legendary. Mike has held positions with BioCentury, the Informa Group, and is now at Decision Resources Inc., where he is Global Head of Thought Leadership. Mike, over to you.
Okay, so can I have the next slide, please? So thank you to John. Last year, at the end of the winners and losers speech, Tony Jones asked me for a forecast for 2020. My answer was that I thought China would emerge as a consequential player in the prospects of the pharma industry. I was actually thinking that China was going to be a major market for some global pharma companies. And in fact, AstraZeneca is, has about 20% of its revenues there. I was also alluding to the fact that we're seeing a lot of innovative Chinese companies that are gaining critical mass. At that time, none of us knew what was about to be unleashed. Next slide, please. So making forecasts is always difficult. The consensus among economists was that the world would see growth on average at some 3.4% in 2020. Instead, with COVID-19 pandemic, the world economy has shrunk by about 10%. Governments have had to throw fiscal prudence out the window as they've struggled to keep their economies afloat. Unfortunately, the pandemic has taken its toll in many ways. Millions of lives lost prematurely and hundreds of millions of livelihoods destroyed or put at risk. Consequently, this year, as most people will have experienced some loss, I'm going to focus mostly on the winners rather than the losers. So therefore, I won't be talking about Brexit. I won't be talking about Trump. But what I will be talking about, and clearly one of the biggest winners, has been the pharmaceutical and the biotech sectors. Next slide, please. So one of the undoubted highlights of the year is how the healthcare sector has actually responded to the challenge with focus and with speed. We've also seen creative alliances established, pharma and academia, pharma and biotech, and former pharma rivals working furiously to understand the challenges posed by COVID-19 and then developing solutions to tackle them. Deals and programs that in the past might have taken more than 12 months to sign were actually created within days of a proposal. Next slide, please. Nowhere is this more evident than the pace that vaccines against COVID-19 were created. Even though we were only able to identify and sequence the SARS-CoV-2 virus in the first weeks of January, within the same year, the pharmaceutical sector has, with brilliance and agility, developed vaccines that look to be very effective. Indeed, this week, we have seen the first patients in the UK be vaccinated with the Biotech Pfizer mRNA vaccine. And it looks very likely that the vaccine and others will be rolled out elsewhere in the coming weeks and months. Non-vaccine approaches will take some time, and there will be some false starts, as we've already seen. But given the scale of vaccination programs, it's clear that we're going to need many vaccines being produced in parallel. We would all be winners if some of the new approaches to accelerate innovation become permanent fixtures, especially to other diseases that are also devastating. We could actually learn from how did we get to those vaccines so quickly? Are there new behaviors that we could actually make permanent that would actually help in the development of drugs for things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's? Next slide, please. So one of the big winners of 2020 is science. And before my friends at Nature Publishing Group start firing off rude messages to me, I mean the pursuit of science rather than the publication itself. Among the scientists who deserve our plaudits, as well as our thanks, are Katalin Kariko and Drew Weissman, who first solved the challenge of getting mRNA into humans, described in this now legendary 2005 paper. And it's an approach that underpins the mRNA work of both Moderna and Biotech. Similarly, I'd actually like to acknowledge Ugur Sahin and Özlem Türeci, scientists and co-founders of Biotech, who have tirelessly practiced at perfecting the technology and have delivered the first ever mRNA medicine. Next slide, please. One of the consequences of travel and social distance restrictions that have been put across the globe has been the disruption to clinical trials and also the care of non-COVID-19 patients. Approximately 1,400 trials have suffered delays in patient recruitment or have been disrupted because patients were unable to attend clinics. Many companies have had to delay starting new trials or put ongoing trials on ice, or worse still, actually have had to close them down. Looking at all the likely delays in phase 3 clinical trial completions, my colleagues at Clarivate are warning that sales of about $57 billion could actually be at risk in 2026. So it's not just the sort of the medical challenges, but also there are commercial challenges. Next slide, please. In a survey that that we did of 4,844 US patients, it's called the Cyber Citizen Health US 2020 survey. It's clear that 45% of US adults actually consider themselves high risk for COVID-19. This not only affects their mental health, but also puts them at risk of not getting or seeking diagnoses or treatments for diseases that are more treatable at an early stage. So this is, clearly a challenge that has started this year, and if we don't resolve it, it means that we could actually be causing trouble for ourselves later on. So next slide, please. Indeed, another finding of the Cyber Citizen Health Survey was more than 2 out of 5 US patients actually say that the pandemic has disrupted their care, whether that was because they were unable to see a doctor in person, or the nature of their care had changed, or a treatment or procedure had been cancelled or postponed. One consequence of this, though, has been a rise in virtual consultations and telemedicine. Next slide, please. At DRG, we've been tracking the adoption of telemedicine and teleconsultations by doctors through our regular Taking the Pulse surveys. While there had been some reluctance by US doctors to adopt such processes and approaches, often because it was not clear actually how they would get reimbursed for their efforts, the pandemic, social distancing, and travel restrictions has seen a major surge in virtual patient consultations. Interestingly, the doctors are telling us, given their experience with virtual consultations, it's actually very likely that they will continue to use them, at least in a sort of a blended way, as often as possible. More importantly, it's also clear from our surveys of patients that actually they also would like to see such change. So it'll be interesting to also see, when we sort of look at this new sort of virtual, this new online experience, what the emergence of the online pharmacy services as envisaged by Amazon is actually going to have on existing businesses. So next slide, please. So we've all seen wider adoption of digital practices, everywhere. We're also seeing it in the conduct of clinical trials. This was something that was already happening, but the pandemic has actually accelerated the process. And in fact, those companies that had already been putting in digital platforms into the workflows were clearly best placed to cope with the challenges thrown up by the pandemic, and therefore, would count, I guess, as winners. Next slide, please. And in response to the pandemic, regulators have actually taken a more flexible approach to the use of digital technologies. Having seen its benefit, there's a possibility that some of these changes might be a good foundation stone for future activity. Next slide, please. So with travel restrictions and reduced in-person pitch, it has been a record year for deals, both in volume and value. While a lot of deals focused on COVID-19 have been signed this year, even without those deals, this would still have been a marquee year. The only decline we've seen on a year-on-year basis is on the M&A front. But this year's tally, while lower than 2019, it actually has surpassed both 2017 and 2018. And clearly, all this activity has underpinned investor confidence in the sector, and healthcare and biotechs in particular have had a strong year in financing. Next slide, please. So here's a table listing some of the largest biopartnering deals of the year. In the interest of time, I'm not going to dwell on them. These and some of the other tables I'm going to be showing you are all in the Biotech Resilience white paper that you can download from the DRG website. Next slide, please. So this here just illustrates actually how biotechs have outperformed the general market. What we can sort of see is the biotech, the Nasdaq Biotech Index is up 20.93% year to date. That's compared with 3.9% of the Dow. The biotech index, it's a weighted index of about 200 biotech stocks. The BioWorld index actually is closer to 500 biotech stocks, and therefore there's a lot more sort of up and down there, and but it's still up 6.1%. Some of the notable gainers are around in the COVID-19 space. The losers on the list, they weren't necessarily the heaviest fallers, but are large cap businesses that for various reasons have bucked the positive trend for most of the sector. So next slide, please. So this is a summary of how stellar 2020 has been for biotechs looking to raise money. In total, the sector has raised about $120 billion from the capital markets. And it's right away across the board, whether it's from VCs, whether it's from IPOs. It's breaking records all over. And with investment groups raising additional funds, there's plenty of dry powder to finance the sector for the future. Next slide, please. So here's a table of the top US private financings. There's been an upsurge in a lot of sort of platform and sort of platform technologies. And actually, interestingly, some of the biggest deals were in areas such as liquid biopsy. But COVID-19 activities clearly also have attracted funding and support. Next slide, please. And indeed, if you look in Europe, CureVac was the largest money raiser in the European sphere, and CureVac is developing mRNA vaccines, including one for COVID-19. But you can also see that actually across the whole of Europe, Switzerland, UK, Germany, Netherlands, they've all sort of performed pretty well. Next slide, please. And then in the Asia Pacific, biotechs based in mainland China continue to attract the bulk of capital. And actually, we'll see in a later slide, many of these companies that have raised VC money quickly go on to do a public offering. Next slide, please. So the IPO market has also been at a very, very buoyant year. As I say, it's sort of been raising, record amounts of money, and it still seems to be, very, very attractive. If we go to the next slide, in Europe, it's interesting that, as you can sort of see by the slide, most European biotechs now elect to list on the US market. Indeed, while European exchanges like the London Stock Exchange and AIM in the past would have been ranked second to NASDAQ, that in fact is no longer the case. Although this afternoon in the financing panel, Seb from Pennington Manchester Cooper will be making a strong case for LSE biotech listings. So that'd be worth listening to. Next slide, please. So if you go to the top Asia Pacific biotech IPOs, what you can sort of see is that Hong Kong is the favored stock exchange, and these Chinese companies are gaining critical mass at pace. And given that many of these flotations were actually oversubscribed, hundreds of times, it's like 300, 400 times oversubscribed, it's evidence that there is investor appetite in the region for the sector. Next slide, please. And then this is the list of some of the largest new funds that have been created this year. It's about $21 billion worth of new money that is going to be specifically earmarked for this sector, has been raised. So those guys are going to have to put that money to work. So therefore, there will be opportunities. Next slide, please. But to return to my thesis that science is a winner, I thought it would, it would be right for us to acknowledge the Nobel Prize for Chemistry that was awarded to Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna for their work on CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing. At Clarivate, the Web of Science, Clarivate's Web of Science, we have publication and citation data, and it reveals that, in fact, the CRISPR revolution has quickly transformed the work of thousands of researchers. So the chart shows you the number of citations to the breakthrough paper of Charpentier, Doudna, and colleagues that was published just in August 2012. And it rose from 11 in that year to more than 1,000 citations a year. And now total citations topped 6,000. The chart also illustrates the growth of CRISPR-related papers each year from 2012 to 2019, which rocketed from 133 to 5,467. So, to date, more than 23,000 papers using the CRISPR method have been recorded in the Web of Science. Next slide, please. So, finally, some of the losers linked to biotech sector are those linked to conferences and exhibitions. I mean, this conference is a digital affair, having been at the QE2 Centre for many years. Whether it's organizers who are now exploring a digital experience, or airlines who transport delegates across the globe, or the hotels that we all stayed in, they're all going to be surely feeling the pinch. That means, however, that executives don't have to pay thousands of dollars getting to JP Morgan, staying in less than attractive hotels at exorbitant prices. 20,000 people attend JPM and the satellite meetings last year. So that, clearly is going to be a hit on the San Francisco economy. The question is, what impact will this have on the industry ability to network? While we'll be able to spend more time with family, we might miss out on that opportunity that would have only happened as a result of an accidental collision in the hotel lobby. Next slide, please. So a lot of the, as I said, a lot of the sort of the tables and the data, etc., they appear in this white paper. So contact me and I will let you know how to download the full white paper. Next slide. And this is my final slide. So I'll hand over back to John.
Thanks very much for that, Mike. Really good presentation. We've got time for one question because you did overrun, as you predicted. So the question from the audience is, will the sector meet the expectations raised this year? And perhaps, Mike, you could give your tips to companies on how to do that.
Well, I think that one of the advantages that the industry has, okay, is having been able to raise all that money. Okay, it actually gives them bandwidth to actually experiment. I think the second thing that they'll have learned from this year is actually what is possible. In the past, they might have been sort of hamstrung by bureaucracy, etc. They now realize that isn't necessary. So I'm actually sort of pretty confident that the industry is going to deliver. I'm not going to do any sort of like stock picking and sort of saying who's going to be a winner or what have you. But I think that the markets are pretty smart. Most of the investors in this sector are educated or experienced with the risks, etc., associated with the sector, and the fact that the fund flows are piling into the sector suggests it's got a bright future.
Thank you very much, Mike. Pleasure having you on the session again. So thanks very much.
Thanks,
I'll
John.
move over to our next speaker, Nerida Scott. Nerida did her PhD at Cambridge, and then by way of Boston Consulting and Vernalis, she ended up at Johnson & Johnson, where she's held a variety of posts. But at the moment is Head of Innovation for EMEA, and her talk is entitled Building an Innovative Healthcare Ecosystem. So Nerida, over to you.
Thanks very much, John, and really impressed by all the data, Mike, really interesting. So if you could load the deck, and first up, let me say, innovation is all about pivoting. So actually my talk is slightly pivoted, but still in the same theme. We're going to be talking a little bit about driving UK life sciences innovation this morning. And, as John has said, I've been with J&J for over 5 years now, but I've actually been in the UK biotech and healthcare sector for a further 20. And it's my pleasure really to have a few minutes with you this morning and to be able to talk a bit about innovation in the UK life sciences sector and the opportunities that we have to really drive that forward. I think some of them we see today that Mike has already presented, and I think as well how this leads into innovation that we can drive after this pandemic. So I'd like to start by explaining why the UK is relevant to me and J&J Innovation. And if I can have the next slide, please, the first slide. Let me start with Johnson & Johnson. J&J is the world's largest and most broadly based healthcare company. Its entire heritage consists of innovation that's delivering value to patients, to payers, and to consumers. So today the business is focused in 3 different areas. We have Janssen Pharmaceuticals, we have our medical devices or medtech division, and we have our consumer health group. And our investment in R&D, as you see here, just in 2019 alone, was $11.4 billion. That's an enormous commitment to innovative healthcare. Next slide, please. And why do we drive innovation at this rate? Well, if we do it right, we can extend years of life, and we can improve the quality of that life and overall increase well-being. So we are innovating to keep people well, and that delivers value for society very widely. Next slide, please. So within Johnson & Johnson Innovation and within the UK, we bring a broad toolkit to partner with a variety of different stakeholders in this sector. So we work with entrepreneurs, with biotechs, with academic institutes, venture capitalists, with government and with charities to accelerate the most transformational innovation. And within any of our 3 sectors, but also across the 3 sectors to try and drive truly transformational innovation. And we know for innovation, there is no one size fits all for our collaborations and our partners. And instead what we do is we tailor how we work based on what is the science, what is the innovation and the opportunity for it, and what are the needs of our partner. So it may be providing scientific or business mentoring. It may be company incubation or access to laboratory space from our JLabs team. It may be that we're looking at seed investment or other equity investment tools via JJDC, which is our strategic corporate venture group. Or it may be early stage R&D collaboration funding. It may be a licensing agreement or an option agreement. It may be commercialization expertise or other transactional support via our innovation centre, which is based here in London, and it's serving not just the UK, but all of our EMEA region. We also have these teams that are focused on connecting innovation across sectors. And I think that convergence is very, very important in where innovation is going, being able to deliver early intervention or prevention of diseases and cure. And we have a World Without Disease Accelerator team and a flagship lung cancer initiative ongoing in the UK and globally. So this comprehensive support means that we can unleash the full capabilities of the Johnson & Johnson family of companies to help our partners achieve their goal here in the UK. So next slide, please. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time and just share with you, some of the excellence that we find, and the access to talent and funding here in the UK gives us the capability to innovate and make a highly appealing location for J&J to embed and engage with the innovation ecosystem. So here I have a selection of examples of how JJI has collaborated with innovative UK life sciences groups just in this year in 2020. We've been engaged very actively with consortia, for example, working on the needs of dementia and psychiatry, as well as partnerships with companies like Huma and Koa Health, and all of these working and addressing mental health, using innovation that includes data science, digital therapeutics, and clinical trials to tackle conditions that present the most significant challenge to society, and indeed cost to healthcare systems worldwide. Oncology is another area where there is a great patient need, and we are working with Bruntwood SciTech at Alderley Park to support the researchers and startup companies there to bring their oncology innovations to life science as part of the new oncology development program just launched a couple of months ago. And as well as biotechs like Adarex to find new ways to potentially treat lung cancer earlier and potentially save lives. In addition to being part of the whole genome sequencing consortia, working with the UK Biobank, a collaboration that we entered in 2019, just in the last week, we've announced our participation in another biopharmaceutical consortium with the UK Biobank, including Janssen, which is launching a proteomics study with the Biobank, which aims to further the scientific community's understandings of disease processes and support innovative drug development by translating genomic information through proteomics to phenotypic. Janssen and the Big Data Institute at the University of Oxford have collaborated this year to allow research fellows to advance our understanding of human genetic signatures and identify potential targets for treatment. Enormous amounts of data coming from every different direction, and the analytics associated with it are key for success. We also facilitated a collaboration between Janssen and Exonates in the UK to advance a revolutionary eye drop for the potential treatment of retinal vascular diseases. And the next slide, please. As we go beyond early stage innovation, which I've just shared a few examples there, J&J has engaged in a variety of partnerships on innovation in the UK's healthcare environment. Maybe just starting with the response to COVID-19 in this very extraordinary year. Innovation has been extraordinary. I think many of you will have seen in November, one of our 2 global phase 3 clinical trials was initiated here in the UK, first patient dosed, to explore our SARS-CoV-2 vaccine candidate. And we welcome every candidate that is coming forward. I think our medical devices team and facility up in Leeds reconfigured their 3D printing capability to produce face masks to donate to the NHS. And this helped fulfill some of the PPE needs of NHS staff during the pandemic at the very critical early stages. We donated 15,000 coveralls, 14,000 aprons, and 4,000 sets of goggles directly to the NHS on behalf of the company. Our diffuse synthesis trauma team, also part of our medical devices group, have supported in the reconfiguration of 30 new trauma sites across the UK during the pandemic. And across Johnson & Johnson, a medical volunteering policy for COVID-19 was put in place where the company provides up to 14 weeks of paid leave for medically trained employees, including doctors, nurses, and pharmacists who can provide medical help and support the ongoing fight of COVID. We donated $1 million to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to study public sentiment, very important studies regarding current and future potential measures to contain and treat COVID-19. And through the Johnson & Johnson Foundation in EMEA, we provided additional funding to our charity partner, the Mental Health UK, to help them sustain the helplines and advice services, which have seen an exponential increase in demand since COVID-19 outbreak began. I think other ways that we've helped as well, we've been the key industry sponsor in PanSurge, which is a global hub for surgeons and related professionals to share experiences as well as policy and data and research to help with the delivery of effective surgical care during the pandemic. It's been an extraordinary learning curve for everybody. And PanSurge was formed by a group of clinicians, surgeons, and academics from Imperial College London. Clinicians are now across the globe and multiple specialties are collaborating through the platform to share insights and best practice and education. I think there's so many ways where partnership has been extraordinary this year, and we are all in it together. Beyond the pandemic, as well in the wider J&J team, we've entered joint working partnership, forming HemeBase with the Welsh Government and NHS Wales and Myeloma UK. This is looking at improving outcomes for blood cancer patients in Wales through the collection and assessment of clinical and patient-reported data. Again, a drive for data producing innovation and value. Another example about the effective use of data is the Blood Cancer Alliance and their Blood Cancer Dashboard project, which is designed to encourage a greater focus on blood cancer outcomes through data collection and use. Mirror GTX is a jointly collaborative effort progressing AAV, a gene therapy for the treatment of inherited retinal diseases. The first program, AAV-RPGR, is in phase 1/2 trials, which are conducted multiple sites in the US, but also here in the UK and at Moorfields. And the one-year findings from those studies have supported advancement of the program into phase 3 and include really significant functional vision improvements for patients that have been observed as they reduce the time taken to walk through a vision-guided mobility maze at 9 months. So innovation in many, many different dimensions. The mental health work with the greater J&J team has also been key. For example, a couple here, but just for example, one of them is that Janssen's partnering with the Greater Manchester Mental Health NHS Foundation and looking at bringing forward a mobile application called Chart My Health that enables patients with mental illness to become leaders in the management of their own physical health. But I think, as you can see from the small samples of engagements here, that J&J's collaborations range broadly. Our aim is to understand the needs of our partners and to find common goals and provide them with the appropriate support to accelerate the innovation to improve the health of lives of all sorts of patients. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to spend thinking about what this all holds for the future and where are we going? Where does the pandemic allow us as well to experiment and innovate in a more accelerated fashion? I think we've known for some time that medicines can lower the overall healthcare expenditure by reducing hospitalization and other direct healthcare costs. We have data from 2012 and that kind of period of time looking at long-acting antipsychotic medication for patients with schizophrenia, demonstrating a reduced number of annual bed days by 40 to 45%. And we've got data from the US as well, looking at $1 spent on medicines for chronic diseases such as congestive heart failure, hypertension, diabetes. That can generate a return or a saving of up to 3 to 10-fold. I think if you look at the graphic on the right and expenditure on a per capita basis on cardiovascular hospitalizations, the predictions are that it would have been 70% higher in 2004 had cardiovascular medicines not been introduced in the previous decade. So there's plenty of supporting evidence for medicines being able to help reduce the cost of care. But what else can we gain? Next slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated how fast that we can adapt. Next slide, please. Thank you. This new normal is evident within the biotech and healthcare industry, with a pivot to the increasing inclusion of remote delivery and the management of healthcare that is supported by digital and data advances and innovation. In some cases, we have more and significantly better data that's been collected that could have ever been collected in the past. We can truly put the patient at the center of the healthcare world, and to help keep them well and to intercept early or prevent disease. So take this example in depression that's shown here. Instead of visiting a physician once every 4 or 6 weeks, pardon me, for a 20-minute consultation and assessment period, we have the opportunity to use remote and continuous quantitative assessment of patients' symptoms, either self-reported or supplemented with physician reporting. We can look at day-to-day functioning behavior in terms of connectivity to digital and remote monitoring. We can look at how patients respond real-time to treatment, how well their recovery is progressing, and outcomes generally. So we have leading indicators to provide timely medical help. We can see events that might be being advanced or where patients might be at risk, and we can reduce high morbidity events so we can prevent relapses and hospitalization. We can enable faster and more reliable linkage to outcomes to support better patient recovery and their maintenance. Next slide, please. And I think by enabling this better patient management, we can look to also provide the data on how this is reducing costs and improving outcomes. Instead of that reliance on lagging measures, such as hospitalizations and death that I showed a couple of slides ago, which misses completely the chronic disability and suffering of patients, we can actually look at leading outcome measures that represent true value to the patient and to their carers. The total cost of mental health illness isn't captured, but the integration of these behavioral and physical health costs will enable total cost measurement. I think these rapid advances and changes and comforts in ways of working that we've seen through this pandemic can precipitate a step change in the adoption. And I think it's really important here in the UK that we recognise the value of that integrated innovation across healthcare delivery. Delivering patient-centric healthcare is essential in keeping people well. And if we're able to keep them well, they'll be able to live their lives to the full with family and friends, but also actively contribute to the prosperity of the UK, driving GDP and broader societal benefit. And as we've seen during this pandemic, the delivery of healthcare is really at the centre of our world. So thank you very much for your time today. Welcome any questions, John.
Nerida, thank you very much for that fascinating insight. Got a question. Picking up on the point about data, how do you foresee the future of healthcare companies working with the technology data providers?
I think it's already happening, John. I think we partner, J&J in the US partner with Apple Watch, looking at both clinical studies, looking at ECG results. I think it's integral to how we can manage and help prevent disease in patients that either don't know they have it, or for patients who have chronic long-term illnesses, ways of being able to very effectively avoid or manage that risk. And I think that it is an absolute partnership. We can see it happening in many places, both in the UK and globally.
And supplementary to that, if healthcare companies need more data expertise, how do we attract these skills and talents into our sector? Because they're gobbled up by other people at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the skills conversation is a very important one, and it is rapid. You know, there's a very strong need for those skill sets in life sciences and data sciences more generally, and you know, we potentially compete with, you know, financial sectors and broadly health tech sectors, entertainment sector. There's various places where data sciences and tech skill can travel, and I think you know, highlighting the needs of and the importance of healthcare, as we've all seen during the pandemic, is one way where we can actually you know, springboard to attract that talent to a very, very important cause that's near and dear to all of us. We all have relatives that we want to help take care of, and I think there's a real passion and drive to be able to attract data and digital tech into the healthcare world. And yeah, it's a building field. There'll be plenty of opportunity, and you know, coming out of COVID, you know, where young people may have very many challenges entering the workforce, it's a huge area of opportunity for talent.
Yeah, excellent. Nerida, thank you very much for that session. So our next speaker is very topical at the moment, Bill Enright, CEO of Vaccitech, who's going to tell us some of the work on the roles of vaccines and immunotherapies beyond the pandemic. So Bill, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate the invitation and the time to be able to present to the audience here. So vaccines, obviously, the emergence of infectious diseases beyond COVID-19 obviously have been long before COVID-19. Emerging infectious diseases have been an issue, and you can see this in this graph on the left, where we look over time. It appears that we've got more and more emerging infectious diseases occurring. Not all of these have dramatic impact on people, but every once in a while you have a breakout like a SARS or a MERS or a COVID-19 that has a significant impact on people. In the graph on the right, you see from an economic perspective, even with flu in the normal pandemics, it has a significant impact, closing in on what people estimate as the economic impact from climate change. So, you know, this is a long overdue and overlooked area for investment in the vaccine and infectious disease space. Vaccines themselves have had a tremendous impact on these emerging infectious diseases over time. People would say that vaccines have been one of the most impactful medical interventions in the history of mankind, save maybe clean water and penicillin. So, you know, we've had a significant impact on childhood infectious diseases like measles and pertussis, etc. And you can see that over the last decade, there continues to be a significant growth in the revenues generated from vaccines and vaccine companies in dealing with these diseases, as people deal not only with the childhood infectious diseases, but also emerging infectious diseases and using vaccines for other indications around elderly and pneumococcal and other important diseases like HPV, for instance, where they've had significant impact. So, you know, the COVID-19 emergence earlier this year clearly has had a global impact, not just from an economic impact, where you see, you know, almost 2,700 or more than $2,700 billion in investments to support the economies and support these things moving forward. because of the broad economic issues that this disease is causing as countries lock down and businesses are shuttered and people are moving in place and losing jobs, etc. The reality is, once this is solved with medical interventions, that this large amount of investment by countries will be recouped very, very quickly. The real impact, though, is in the death rate and the tremendous impact that this is having on mortality and morbidity, and the not just people infected with COVID-19, but also the impact on our healthcare system. The at present, it's estimated that 90% of the ICU beds in the United States are full with COVID-19 patients. It has a tremendous impact on the healthcare system, not just on individual lives and the lives affected by those lost, but we also don't really understand the true long-term impact of this disease. And as we're learning more about cardiomyopathy issues and depression issues and other things that are associated with this disease, I think the costs on society are going to continue to grow. While this is new and impacting us globally for the first time in decades from a pandemic situation, the previous pandemics of late have been at least local and isolated. As this one is more global, it's not really breaking the mold as you compare to other pandemics that have occurred over time. It's in the same range as the Spanish flu, for instance, the flu of 1918, as far as its mortality and infectiousness, and that is it's interesting because it's just such a long time ago that most people just don't remember, and I think our healthcare systems have dealt with this much more effectively. You're not seeing maybe the same magnitude of deaths that you saw in 1918, even if it is causing more economic burdens around the globe. So, some of the good things that have occurred as a result of this pandemic, I think we've really, as a healthcare community, been able to deal with this pretty effectively, and given the nature of the disease. So, people have come together as an industry. We've really come together, and you've seen governments get involved to reduce the development risks here, to speed timelines. We've seen timelines dramatically shortened for the development of effective vaccines and diagnostics. You see that we're really parallel tracking this development now, where in the past, when you're doing product development, typically 10 years and multi-billions of dollars as far as developing a single product, the timeline is really that 10-year time horizon is really because things are done in series instead of a parallel tracking. And that's one of the things that I think has been, people have really looked for innovative solutions from a regulatory perspective, or from a clinical trials perspective. We've looked at adaptive trial designs and been able to do phase 1, 2, 3 studies. The regulatory agencies have really been flexible in looking at new and streamlined release testing for these products. Not that any step is being skipped, but that we're able to use new technologies to address some of these standard release assays that allow us to shorten the timeline, allow us to shorten the clinical development timeline. We're looking at emergency use authorization so that we can get, the ultimate goal here is to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as possibly globally. and to reduce the burden on the healthcare system and on deaths generally. And what you're seeing as a result is there's some tremendous industry collaborations that are resulting in public-private partnerships. And so I think from a healthcare perspective moving forward, there's really been some tremendous advantages that have occurred over the last year. And it's really unprecedented the speed at which we're being able to develop appropriate countermeasures here. This virus was first sequenced in middle of January, and this week we've had the first emergency use authorization for a vaccine. That's unbelievable speed, unprecedented. Again, going through all the necessary development processes. So we know that the safety testing has been done, both in the appropriate animal models, and the appropriate clinical work has been done to show that it is both safe and effective. And it's just incredible to show how quickly this has been done. And we couldn't do it without the way the government funding, which really helped to reduce some of that risk that companies would normally have to take. And so that allowed us to do some of this parallel tracking. And as I mentioned, this really is a global problem and requires a global solution, because it won't be totally under control unless it's totally under control globally. So we need to ensure that we have a global supply. And that's one of the big issues, and it's one of the things that Vaccitech, even though we were involved very early in the development of this COVID-19 vaccine that's now licensed to AstraZeneca, we quickly realized that if we were successful here, that having a vaccine that's necessary to go out to 7.8 billion people in the world, it needs significant attention from large pharma to make sure that we reduce the manufacturing and commercialization risks here, ability to get it to more people quickly. And, and that's one of the reasons that we looked at licensing. And I think one of the reasons that you see multiple players here is no one individual company can target that level of need. And so I think there's plenty of room here for multiple vaccines, and it's very encouraging to see solid efficacy data from Moderna and as well as Pfizer's BioNTech vaccine and AstraZeneca's vaccine. And I think we'll continue to see interesting data from J&J and from Novavax and from others. So it will be required to reach this global population. What we really don't understand at this point is how long will that last, and whether there'll be vaccines that are specific for certain age groups or certain populations, or whether certain vaccines will work longer, or whether T cells will be important as part of the solution, and only a certain number of these vaccines have T cells associated with them. So there's still a lot of unknowns, but we're making a great deal of progress. So Vaccitech is very well positioned here to deal with these outbreaks and pandemics. We've got a technology platform that allows us to move very quickly. We've got a lot of previous experience in emerging infectious disease through the work that was done at the University of Oxford, particularly in some of these lesser known diseases in Lassa and Nipah, as well as developing vaccines against MERS and Zika. Because the fact that we had human data against a coronavirus with our MERS vaccine, I think really helped us to move very quickly into the COVID-19 space. So it's a very similar antigen with MERS. It's the spike glycoprotein, allowed us to move very quickly, and the fact that the regulatory agencies, particularly MHRA, was very familiar with this platform technology and the safety profile, again, allowed us to move quite quickly here. So this is a very scalable process, as we can see from all the work that AstraZeneca has done, moving this technology to many different manufacturers around the globe, trying to ensure that we have this global supply that I just mentioned. And so the way this platform works is typically for Vaccitech, we've got a prime boost approach where we're priming the body's immune system using an adenovirus, which induces very high levels of antibodies as well as T cells. So it gets a very broad immune response, very similar to the way a natural infection would occur. And then we take the same antigen and move that into a different vector that significantly stimulates the T cell response in particular. And so much of the focus of the products that Vaccitech is working on is really on the immunotherapy side, where we need this added T cell boost. So depending on where we're targeting prophylactic vaccines, or therapeutic indications, is whether or not we use just the chimp adenovirus, or whether we also use the chimp adenovirus in combination with MVA. We're using this combination because we've shown, and many others have shown, that we get the highest magnitude of CD8 T cells, that these T cells are functional, and that we can induce T cell response over a very long period of time, so 1.5 to 2 years. We hope that plays out in the duration of the immune response as well. And we've got a team of researchers that are working hard to ensure that we're improving the immunogenicity that results from these vectors, and to design appropriate antigens, and to be able to move these things forward in the clinic. We've got a number of programs moving forward, including our therapeutic approaches to providing a functional cure for hepatitis B. We're in the clinic currently as well, or open for enrollment in our HPV program, and this is also being applied in oncology, as well as the prophylactic indications that I've already talked about. So, I think that the future of vaccines and immunotherapy is strong. I think that the COVID-19 actually probably brought a spotlight to the area of infectious disease, which really wasn't well funded prior to this over time. And I hopefully that this will maintain some increased level of funding and interest in ensuring that we're well prepared for the next pandemic, and that we're dealing with these diseases in advance in a variety of different ways. So with that, I'll stop and answer any questions.
Thanks very much for that, Bill. That was fascinating insight into Vaccitech. I've just got a couple of questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So now the excitement, the huge success of the COVID vaccine has died down, what actually does the COVID-19 data mean for you and Vaccitech?
Well, it's a couple of different fronts, right? So on one hand, it's extremely validating for us in the technology platform. We have now a huge safety database where we can show that this has been in tens of thousands of people with a very solid safety profile, and then the validation of a large pharma partnership, but it also brings potentially meaningful financial revenue to the company. So we are able to bring a program that we didn't even have in our development pipeline January 1. And by the middle of May, this was in phase 3 clinical development and out licensed to a big pharma partner. So it didn't deter us from our core programs, and yet has a long-term potential financial impact from the royalty stream that should result. And just as a reminder, AstraZeneca, the university, and Biotech have all agreed not to take royalties during the pandemic period. And so we're talking post-pandemic, we believe this is going to be an annual vaccination required against the COVID-19. And so we're looking down the road here.
Excellent, thanks so much. And what's next, do you think? I mean, what do you think the platform will be used next for by Vaccitech? What's the priority?
Yeah, so the priority is moving some of these therapeutic programs forward. We believe that T cells are very important in chronic infectious disease and in cancer. A lot of different vaccine approaches have been tried in cancer. We believe that the combination with checkpoint inhibitors and a high magnitude immunostimulant that's getting high levels of CD8 positive T cells is potentially impactful here. So we're anxious to see how this responds in oncology as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bill, for you taking time out to give us this talk. Great to meet you, and I wish you well for the future. Thanks very much.
John, thank you very much, and appreciate the time as well.
Cheers. So that concludes this morning's presentations. I'd just like to thank all of our presenters personally for taking the time out to talk to us this morning. Just one announcement. Sorry, unmute. That concludes this morning's sessions. I'd just like to thank all of our presenters for their efforts in presenting to us this morning. There's just one announcement. There's a break till about 11:30 where delegates can now watch on-demand content. They can network via the app or attend the Coffee Buddies session with Elliot Forster, the CEO of F-Star Therapeutics. And also it gives you time to vote for the awards. So thank you very much. And that's it from me this morning.